What happens? Have you had kids who cried in kindergarten? How do you deal with that?
So many, and it's understandable. I think
Do they have any consequences if they weren't respectful?
it's always such a funny thing, I think, with kids. It's on a parent or teacher's face when they say something like,
Hi guys! Today I'm really excited to have our very first teacher trainer of Eureka, Veronica, here with us. She's back from visiting in Canada and she has some really good teacher tips for all of our teachers.
Hi everyone, I'm Veronica. As she said, I lived in Hong Kong for 5 years and worked in kindergarten, primary, and secondary schools, both as a teacher and then as teacher trainer, and have a deep love of being back in this office and working with this team, and excited to talk to you today, Claudia.
Thank you so much for joining us, Veronica. It's such a great pleasure for us to pick your brain and help share what you've learned at Eureka with all our teachers. Yeah, so tell me, what made you decide to become a teacher?
So actually, both my parents are teachers, so I can say that I fought becoming a teacher for quite some time because I wanted to go my own path. But then I was finding all these different jobs, working with kids, working with youth. I did, summer camps, and I worked as a tour guide with students. And so I kept doing jobs that were very close to teaching. And so then when I was in Hong Kong and realized that, maybe now this is a time I can really get into it. And of course, being in the classroom, I love it. I love working with kids, youth of all ages, and seeing their progress as they work towards their goals.
Nice. Yeah. So were you just a natural teacher, or were there things that really helped you as a teacher that you would like to share with our teachers?
Yeah, definitely you can have all the natural skill in the world, but if you don't know some concrete tips, you're still gonna struggle. So I would say maybe a combination of both experience over time, managing groups of kids. I think everything starts with good classroom management. If you can't control the classroom, then whatever language exercise you're trying to accomplish, if all your time is spent asking people to listen, you're not going to get very far. So definitely I would say classroom management is first. And then I would also say that I think a lot matters with how the teacher presents themselves in the classroom, knowing how to make the choices of, is this a moment where it makes sense for me to be behind my desk because maybe it is a quiet, focused activity. Let's say the students are writing a test or an essay and they just come up to you with quiet questions, then that's appropriate. But if you're trying to run a really lively phonics activity, then, being present in the classroom, walking around the room. So the way the teacher shows up in the classroom, I think also plays into classroom management and the success for students learning.
Yeah, I have so many questions for you about classroom management because I'm sure that's something all our new teachers struggle with. And you've taught all grades before. Do you have a favorite tip for, let's say, kindergarten?
Ooh, I think for kindergarten, it's important to show the example of what you want to have them do. And I use the word show because especially in a language classroom, you can use your vocabulary. It's important to still say it. But I think when I was in the kindergarten classroom, I think what I've seen be very effective is when the teacher just shows maybe 1 time, 2 times, even something as simple as that they're being quiet, holding up their hand, or, hands at their side, that the kids see that physical thing. And so sometimes I would do that even in a game. You play a little bit of Simon Says, hands on your eyes, hands on your head, hands on your hips. Okay, quiet now. And so it just kind of naturally leads into it. So I think for kindergarten age, I would say finding how you can use games to feed into the classroom management. It doesn't have to just be, we're strict in class, we're quiet, no talking, but you make it a game and then get the students' energy where you want it to be. And by leading an activity that ends on a quiet note, then that leads you into what your next thing would be.
That's a really good idea to gamify even classroom management because kids love to play. What happens? Have you had kids who cried in kindergarten? How do you deal with that?
So many, and it's understandable. I think kids are so good at showing their emotions. As adults, we learn that that's not the socially acceptable thing to do, but kids just have to let it out. And so I think that depends a lot on the relationship between the English teacher in the classroom and the local teachers who are the counterparts in the room, and understanding what the expectations are between the two of you. Because I definitely have seen, and in the classrooms I was in, There's some cases where your local counterpart is quite busy. They'll be in the room in case you need help, but they might kind of hope or trust that you can manage the class yourself. And so in those cases, if a kid is crying, then you need to make that judgment call as a teacher of how to give that student what you need while still making sure the rest of the group is taken care of. While if you have a local teacher who has the time and is able to in that lesson help out, then that might be the type of situation where you tag team, that either they take the student a little bit and then you continue with the class. So I would say if you need to be managing it yourself, then finding that balance of not drawing all the attention to that crying student, because then that's a lot of attention on them. But it might be something small, like if your next activity, as an example, is a phonics game, and you're going to hand out the phonics sounds to different kids in the room, and then one at a time call them up when they hear their sound. So they have to be listening to return the sound to you. So maybe in that situation, I wouldn't give the crying kid the phonics sound yet. I would do the first round as a quiet activity where others get it. And then maybe in the second round, give a sound I know that kid can do next, so that then there can be a moment of one-on-one with them to encourage. Of course, this example is assuming that I know they're not crying because they're hurt or in danger or hurting others. Of course, as a teacher, you should assess all of that first. This is more where maybe you can see that the crying is more out of missing parents or feeling scared about English class, or just new routines can all impact.
Yeah, that's a good tip, because it's like you're not putting all the attention there. So you're still running the class. It's a calming presence, but at the same time, you're still encouraging that one child with something they know so that they feel that confidence and can move on. Oh, I like that. What about primary school? Do you do something different for primary and secondary, or is it more similar?
I would say different. And I think this also comes from knowing yourself as a teacher and what your presence is like, because I think as you get into primary and secondary, especially secondary, I think things like the way you carry yourself in the class, the energy you bring, the students will react differently to a teacher who's closer in age to them, to a teacher who comes in maybe a little bit older with a different energy and experience level. And so my answers here, I think, partly depend on knowing what your strengths are, that if your strengths are to be the really energetic out there, talking to them every time in the hallway, in the classroom, you're building that familiarity with them. Whereas if your presence, if you've learned your teaching style is a lot more, focused work and then some kind words one-on-one, then maybe your energy is a bit different. So I think for primary, I would make sure they know the rules first. I think, well, for both age groups, one pitfall I saw as a teacher trainer, new teachers going into, was immediately wanting the kids to like them and thinking that the best way to do that, of course, we want our students to enjoy being in our class, but there's that pitfall of trying to be the cool and fun teacher right away before you've established the expectations. And so then it can be very hard if you've come in and it's just fun and games, that then when something you do need their attention, you do need them to focus, that can be harder. So I would actually typically start with seeming a bit, I don't want to say harsher, but showing them my serious side first. So they would see, this is a classroom, we're here to learn. The first few moments in a classroom, establishing that there are rules, that you'll put your hand, the very, very basic classroom management. And then after that first lesson, usually by after 20 minutes, if the behavior was there, I could start to soften. And then we could end the class or middle of the class, have a really fun game to show I can be that fun teacher. But if we need to be serious, I will switch back into that and we will establish the classroom dynamic again. So I think for both secondary and primary, I would say making sure the students are aware you do know how to manage the class. At the end of the day, you are the adult and the teacher in the room to keep everyone safe and learning.
Yeah, that's so true. I was just thinking how funny it is, because that's something Georgia said too, and then you said, and I'm like, that's something I remember learning too out of experience. Because at first I wanted to be a really nice teacher, and then I was, wow, this does not work. I have to be stricter in the beginning, and then class runs really well, and then you still have a really good relationship with your students. Can you share some class expectations that you set for your classes?
Yeah, if the student's English level was able to kind of make it a bit of a conversation, I actually sometimes just used the one rule, respect. So instead of asking the students to memorize 10 rules of what they can and can't do, we started the class. And again, I'm talking students that are, maybe P5 and up, where they're learning this kind of content in their other classes about how to be a good citizen of the world, how to interact with classmates. And so I would lean into that idea and say, do you know the word respect? Have you learned it before? And then we would kind of define what respect means. So then it was more a conversation of, well, is it respectful to talk over your classmates? How does that make you feel? Do you like it when you're trying to talk to someone and somebody else interrupts? And it's a little bit less concrete. So I say I would only do that in cases where I knew, try it out, or maybe talk with my local colleague ahead of time if they thought it would work for that class. But the nice thing with it is it gives it flexibility later, that you're not trying to memorize 5 rules and then the kid says, well, there's no rule that I can't throw my eraser across the room. But then you can say, well, is it respectful to throw your eraser across the room? Maybe not. So that would be one of the ways I would do it, is focusing on that word.
I love that, because that also goes deep into a principle of life they can bring with them when they come and graduate and they treat other people. It's not about rules anymore, but is that respectful? Do they have any consequences if they weren't respectful?
It's always such a funny thing, I think, with kids. It's the question, the fear on a parent or teacher's face when they say something like, do this by the count of 3. But if you don't know what you're going to do at 3. So what I would always do is you never get to 3, because the actual reality is there's nothing after 3. So if you're going to use a countdown, you should always make sure that the behavior has changed by 2 or you change tactic, because you lose any credibility if by 3 they're still doing the thing. What are you going to do? There actually isn't anything. It's just the idea. I'll give you a few seconds to show me the behavior you want. So if you use some kind of countdown system, I would say just never get to the final one. But more than that, I would use giving choices. So if you give a choice where both of them are the behavior you want to see, the child still feels autonomy, that they can make a choice themselves, but you're giving them 2 options that are appropriate. So if a student has started to become, their energy is very high, they're, interrupting other students or whatever the case is, and it's something that you need to address, then saying, okay, maybe you don't enjoy this activity. So your options are, you can sit here and do the activity now quietly, or if your school uses lunchtime, to catch up, you can come back at lunch. So in both ways for you as the teacher, the activity will get done, but the student has the choice. And so then now they're thinking, well, I don't really want to lose my lunchtime because that's when I get to socialize with my friends. So, and again, I'd say speaking with your school to know what's appropriate within that school, how they run, but giving that option as a way for the kid to make a choice that still accomplishes what you need.
That's nice, because basically you're also demonstrating that you respect them, and now can they respect themselves, but they get to make a choice at the same time.
And I will say, if they try to then repeat something, you also just have to stay firm. No, these are your 2 choices. Not enter into because they'll sometimes try to negotiate other options. You can't get focused, and then you're in a back and forth debate and you've lost your authority. It's, I'm the teacher, I'm saying these are your 2 choices. This is what you can choose from.
That's good. That's a good reminder too, because it's like you have to be clear about your authority and your role. So it's not like a push and pull tension and a fight, but you get the last say at the end of the day. You're the teacher, and kids respect that. Like when kids know your authority, they also respect it without much fighting. I think most of the time. Have you ever dealt with or met teachers who were faced with a really, really, really difficult classroom management behavioral problem? Can you describe that to us?
Yes. And I do want to mention here, especially for very new teachers who might be watching or listening, that as I speak, I can say an important part of all of this is nobody is perfect right from the beginning. Of course, there are things you would never do in the classroom to harm a child, of course. But just to say that some of this takes practice and time, and there's always unexpected, difficult situations. I think where I've seen teachers let's say they tried the approach where they tried to be friends at the beginning. Now they're halfway through the course. There's still 4 classes left. And they come to Eureka and say, it was working fine the first few lessons, but now it got out of control, because that can sometimes happen. The kids have so much fun at the beginning. They're not pushing the buttons until they realize there's no control in this classroom. I can do what I want. And so then sometimes it's that we're too far in, it's not the beginning. So if it's partway through the year, I would say some kind of classroom reset. So if you followed the same structure in the lesson, that you always start with a song, you always play a game, like whatever routine has been consistent, the next lesson you make a plan that you're going to switch it up. And just switching something up will have the students wondering, why is today different? And when you catch them off guard, then this is where I would also say, reach out to a teacher with more experience or to have suggestions and plan how you're going to do this day. It might be that you just flip the order of activities. It might be that you as a teacher, if you normally started with a game, you start with a more quiet reading activity before you switch in. Whatever it is, if you're partway through a course and behavior has been escalating, some way of doing a reset for yourself, for the students, to almost try again or try new tactics, try new approach and say, okay, this is the path we're going to follow from here.
That's good, because that switch, and then you could change your classroom management strategy. Because I've always heard, if you don't start well, they're gone, and you have to start again at the beginning. But to do that little brain twist, and then have a second chance for yourself.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. I think that's also a common mistake, because teacher gets frustrated, students get frustrated because they realize they're not learning as much as they hoped, or, whatever the case is, as people start to get frustrated with the situation, it can become a negative thing. But when I say this switch, it could also be, I'm really going back in my brain now, but one time I came up with some kind of monster reward system. So there hadn't been a point system in place yet, but because things had been getting worse as far as behavior went, I just introduced a point system. So by switch, it was still something positive. I came in and I said, hey, guess what? Now, as of today, we're gonna have a team as a class, and if you can get these 3 things done today, we'll play a game at the end. So instead of, before the game happened at the beginning, regardless of behavior, now it was, we're gonna work towards this together. And so then it doesn't have to be a negative, there were no rules, and now we have rules. You can still make it just through introducing a new classroom management style.
Nice, that's nice. I bet they were all really excited to now have rewards.
Yeah.
So where did you find all these ideas? Because like you said, we don't grow up as teachers with all sorts of ideas right away. What helped you in terms of figuring out what works best for your students and finding all these really creative, effective ideas to use in your classroom?
Part of it is just time, I think. And again, for thinking of the newer teachers coming in, I think part of the biggest mental hurdle at the start is if you don't have this repertoire of options. So the more you gain experience, the easier it is to assess, like that crying child. Is this a moment for a game? Is this a moment I need to ask help? You build up your repertoire to be able to quickly switch. I think for me, it was a lot of both Googling, to be honest, and reaching out to colleagues and reaching out to staff at Eureka, talking to other teachers, genuinely to see, because somebody who has more experience, even if it's a matter of, I used to keep a list of English songs that I really liked, probably ones that had physicality as well, because that's always an easy way to switch the energy of a class. If everyone's doing something different and you sing a repeat after me song that they like and has actions, everyone's brain and hands and feet are occupied. You've got everyone doing the same thing. And so I would keep that as just a list, because again, when you're in the classroom, you're thinking of so many different things at the same time. And so it can be really hard on the spot to say, what's a good English song I could sing right now? But if you just have that list on the side, then you can just glance at it and say, okay, we're gonna sing this song now. So I think a lot of it was talking to people, hearing their best ones, and then keeping those as lists for myself so that I could pull from them when I need it.
I like that. Like having your emergency list of like songs, games, or things to like either fill up time or switch it up.
Yeah.
So because I always feel for our new teachers, because as a teacher, I feel like you're managing so much at the same time. There's like so much stimuli coming at you, so many different students with different personalities, feedback, and you have to think, how do I present myself? What do I say? And so like having a lot of lesson prep and like, I guess, mental preparation beforehand. So you're not like going in with nothing and then starting from there. Like that's so helpful.
I'm really glad you mentioned the different things you manage, because I think figuring out which part of what you're managing is causing difficulty can also be just where the starting place has to be. Because you're managing content, you're thinking what we need to accomplish for the curriculum, you're managing students' behavior with classroom management, you're managing time, that if one activity runs late, you need to adjust and adapt, and you're managing yourself and your own emotions and how you present, as you just said. And so I think, I'm glad you said that, because I think sometimes people think, it's the kids, it's this classroom,
right?
Or it's because this content isn't fun enough. And I think if you're not attacking the right kind of area, then the solution won't be the right fit either.
That's so true. Yeah, I have a follow-up question about that, because I think it is so often that happens, that, teachers would be like, it's the kids. It's not, they're just a mess. Or they'll try one classroom management technique and it doesn't work. And they're like, it doesn't actually work, when there's like several different elements that could lead to the chaos. And yes, sometimes it's out of your control. That is true. That sometimes, kids have stuff going on at home that you can't manage, but oftentimes teachers do contribute a lot to like changing the atmosphere of the classroom. So what would you say to a teacher as a teacher trainer? If someone's like, it's them, I haven't done anything, they can't see their blind side. Like, how do you help a teacher diagnose where the problem might be so that they can have a more enjoyable classroom?
It can be hard when you're the one in the middle thinking of all those things to identify it. So I think some of it is being able to say, the local teachers. I remember in my first week when I was going to be full-time at a primary school, in the first week or two, I asked each of my local colleagues that I was with a few lessons in how they found the kids were reacting to my teaching. Because having that outside perspective, or having somebody at Eureka come and do an observation, because when you're in it, it's so hard to do that diagnosis yourself. And having somebody external be able to say, listen, I've noticed that every time you talk to the kids to help them by their desk, you're standing above them and looking down, and they're looking up and they seem a bit shy or scared to talk to you. Maybe try, what would it feel like for you, for them, if you knelt down next to them, if you're physically able, if it's appropriate, to kneel down and be at eyesight to say, what are you struggling with? What question do you have? And so, I think for people who are trying to diagnose, sometimes it will require an outside set of eyes. And if you don't have somebody who's able to observe, honestly, there were times that I asked permission from the school, but I would set up my camera at the back of the class so that I could watch myself back after, just to see, I didn't realize I really spent a lot of time towards the chalkboard, but that physical space causes a difference. And when you're in the moment, there's so much to pick up on. So I think having that outside perspective, whether it's a colleague, somebody totally external to the school coming in, or even asking to video, can help a lot with that.
Yeah, that's so true, because I think all of us have those blind sides, and I always appreciate it when someone helps me with my lesson, and I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. I didn't realize I was doing that. And it's so helpful to have those mirrors and people who are kind and who want to help you to have a more enjoyable class. That's nice. I wanted to circle back to something else you said earlier about bringing a presence in, because I think that is really important. And sometimes as new teachers, we can get anxious in terms of being like, oh, I'm not like that personality type, or I'm not like that, like really charismatic teacher out there. How do you suggest a new teacher find their own style of teaching so that they're comfortable and, thriving in the classroom?
Big question. Let me think about that for a second. I guess I would say I'm thinking through the typical teaching environment where I think it's fair to say all the English teachers would have different classes, right? Like, you're never just with one course unless you're really only teaching one course with one group. So I would say if you're teaching across a range of ages or a range of students, reflecting on what's working for each group and seeing, is it like maybe almost trying different staying true to yourself, but trying different tactics. Okay, with this group, it seemed that activity went really well. What made it go well? Is it because I was more energetic? Is it because my instructions more clear? What allowed that to go through? And then you can kind of say, okay, I think my strength is, I think I do give good, clear instructions. So the students always understand what's happening, but they still look bored. Okay, maybe that's because I need to add an element of, and this I would say, if you're not a more energetic person, which tends to be, that's an easier way we see in teaching of like, the high energy English teacher who comes in. Not everyone is that, but there's still ways, if you don't have that energy yourself, if you see the kids understand the activity, how can we add a little bit of surprise? So, an element of maybe I do the game the same way 2 times, and then I switch one rule on the 3rd time. So that's not energy coming from me that I need to say, the rules are changed. Oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? If you're not the type to say, oh my gosh, what are we, you can still do that switch, which will keep them interested, engaged. They don't, excited about what's coming next. So I don't know if that really answers how to find your own, I think a lot of self-reflection and like seeing what the students are reacting to.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a good way, because I have seen like every teacher has their own personality, and you can be an introvert or an extrovert and still be a really great teacher if you can find a comfortable spot and have that self-reflection to know what works and what doesn't. Like that is like, I think, a key to becoming a good teacher.
I'll share one example of that because we did have a teacher when I worked here who was a lot more soft-spoken. And so it was an interesting challenge for myself as teacher trainer, because my role as teacher trainer isn't to create replicas of me. So it was challenging me to see if somebody has a quieter, more soft-spoken personality, what is he doing that makes this, because his students loved him. They were so fascinated. So I was really watching, and it was even something as simple as he was doing some repetition games. And so, because they were just working on kind of fluency with repeating the words, later they would do comprehension matching, but this was just to practice saying the vocabulary. And so he sat there with the students, this was a K3 class, and he had them repeat, but then he repeated faster, then he repeated slower. And so for himself, he could just stay there, but through that activity variation, it got them excited, it got them engaged. And that would be, my typical approach would be very different, but I think his was just as effective, if not more, in what that task needed.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that example. I think like we could take that tip too in terms of like activity, because I have seen that work really well for a lot of students. But to be like certain personalities, like if you can find your own strength in it, and then you can do it your way, and almost like when you reflect and you will find, oh, that's really effective in my class, then you can keep repeating and honing onto your strength, like leaning onto your strength as a teacher instead of copycatting like someone else's teaching style. That also helps.